When we talk about faith-rooted community organising, which is the term that the Methodist Church has chosen to use for its work, we're saying that because we recognise that all forms of community organising come from a particular perspective or worldview. And we just want to be open about saying that why and how we do this as Christians is deeply rooted in our particular faith and tradition. It's been my experience that sometimes when we initially invite people to think about their interests or their self-interests, as organisers often speak about, there can be a sort of initial sense of discomfort because we conflate that word self-interest or interest with being self-centred or furthering our own agenda. From a faith perspective, I think that when we're talking about interests, we're really inviting people to reflect on something around calling. What might God be calling or inviting us to pay attention to? So, in the face of what can feel like overwhelming and deeply complex injustice and inequality in our communities, what is it that we as individuals feel particularly passionate about, feel that God is inviting us to respond to? And I'm also increasingly hearing people talk about this sense that the conversations we often have as our gathered church, our gathered Christian community, need to go deeper than the surface level post-church chat about the weather, the village fete, whatever it is in your community. So actually, making space for intentional relationship building through the practices of one-to-one conversations or small group conversations, which are just core practices in community organising, really enable us to deepen our relationships, discover what the interests really are, the issues really are, and not just what we think they might be.
Interests are also really important in the types of relationship that the Constituency Action Network aims to support churches in forming with your local MPs. CAN is not about lobbying. We're not asking you to go to your MP tomorrow with a list of demands. We don't think that would be particularly effective. Instead, CAN is about building a lasting good relationship with your MP and their office so that your church's voice can be heard on the matters that really matter to you locally and nationally. That means getting to know your MP and enabling them to get to know you. When you first meet with your MP, whether that's at an event in your church or community or in their constituency office, it's really helpful to not actually have an agenda other than just meeting each other. It's an opportunity to tell them about the things that your church cares about or is engaged in. But crucially, it's also an opportunity to find out more about them. What does your local MP really care about? What brought them into politics in the first place? What do they think are some of the challenges facing people locally and nationally? What are some of the challenges facing them as a politician? Once you find out some of their interests that go beyond party politics and into really who they are, that will help you to build a relationship, to communicate more effectively with them. And you might also find out things in common that surprise you. Sometimes churches are really concerned about forming a relationship with their MP because the differences between your perspective and your MP's perspective feels really vast. But I think that every church has something in common with your MP, and finding out what it is could be transformative because they're just other human beings after all.
I think there's something really countercultural about what we model through this practice of intentional relationship building with people whose views and perspectives are alike and those who differ from ours. It's a visible outworking of our core beliefs as Christians that all are created in the image of God. Everyone is worthy of dignity and respect, and that's even those with whom we disagree. You might have clocked that my accent is from Belfast. That's where I grew up and it's where I first came to faith. And actually, one of the things that's been really transformative for me was having a minister who used community organising practices to get us local community folk just to talk about the issues that really were bothering us in the late 1990s in Belfast. I'm sure you can imagine what some of those were. gathered us together and then said, right, I know our politicians and I know some of our local councillors, and you are going to go and tell them and have a conversation and a dialogue. It's not going to be lobbying, it's not going to be adversarial. You're going to sit and have a cup of tea and treat them with mutual respect, even people with whom I profoundly disagreed. With their actions, their allegiances, and the things that they thought were the best way forward for my community. There's something really powerful about a group of people who are able to model what that kind of good dialogue and robust conversation looks like in the face of so much tension and conflict within our communities.
But something we've not really spoken much about in these CAN spaces is the potential for local churches to work together in relationship with each other as part of CAN. The Constituency Action Network was started as a way to link local churches to MPs individually, but we also understand that sometimes finding the energy or capacity within one local church is quite difficult. We also know, though, that local churches are already part of networks. They might be mission partnerships, multi-church pastorates, groups of churches working together, or ecumenical groupings like Churches Together. We think that engaging with CAN as a group of churches could be really beneficial in growing a good number of people locally who wish to meet with your MP. So I'm going to share my screen for a second to show you what that could look like. Every voter matters, so 3 of you visiting your local MP together will make a massive difference. But imagine the difference we could make if we were able to host an event for our MP with a turnout of 30, representing 6 churches, with a combined membership of 300. Our MP would really, really need to be listening. It can also really help a group to gel and find their purpose in their life together when they have a project like this to engage with. So I know that some of the things that we've been talking about, like interests and perhaps struggling to find things in common, can be true of groups of churches as well. But a lot of churches would find through working together on something like CAN that they actually have a lot of interests and issues in common, and that we're able to form strong coalitions across those issues to bring them to the attention of our MPs. Um, so it might kind of help to bring together churches that currently feel a world apart.
So some of you might already be familiar with the idea of broad-based community organising, where different groups and organisations intentionally gather together around issues about which they have common concern, use their collective power to act for change and transformation in their community. You might already be familiar with this kind of organising practice through your links with Citizens UK, as Alison has mentioned, or Trussell Trust, or Warm Welcome, or Community Organisers Limited. Our ecumenical relationships are also often at their most fruitful when we build relationships in which we discover this shared desire for the common good, for the well-being and flourishing of all of God's creation. There's something about recognizing the collective power that we have together that we often struggle to acknowledge. I have a brilliant Methodist colleague in the Birmingham circuit where I used to live, Karen, who often tells the story of when she first realised that she had power in her role. She was so used, like many of us, of speaking about serving. And she and a group of other folk from her church and other neighbourhood organisations went and sat down with their local MP. He was initially really disinterested, sitting back in his chair, completely unbothered. This was just one of lots of different meetings. I know not all MPs are like this, but this one was. And they were going around the room saying who they were and what organisation they represented. When Karen said, I am here on behalf of these 2 Methodist churches, which are in your patch, he sat up and took notice, literally straightened up in his seat and looked straight at her. And that's the moment when she realised the collective power that she had. It wasn't that the fact that she was in the room, it was the voices that she was representing, and he recognised and knew that. That MP wanted then to show that they had listened to their constituency and they wanted to get re-elected, so they listened to what that group was saying.
So we're going to move in a moment into a time for conversation, first in small groups and then all together. But before we do that, I'd like to touch on the relationship between JPIT and CAN churches. So Florence said a bit at the beginning about what CAN is, but I'm very aware we haven't said what JPIT is, and some folks might not be aware. So JPIT, the Joint Public Issues Team, helps the Baptist, URC, and Methodist churches work for justice and peace. And as part of that, JPIT organizes CAN. And I'm going to share my screen with you again for a second now. Um, there we go. So you should be able to see that slide that we were talking about earlier. Um, Sometimes I think there's misconceptions about what the relationships between JPIT and CAN churches might look like. I think sometimes churches are used to having lots of initiatives to grapple with, and sometimes that can be challenging. And I think sometimes there's a fear that the relationship that JPIT is trying to create with local churches kind of looks something like this, with kind of JPIT at the top telling local churches what to do. Just another organization with another initiative trying to tell people what to think and do. But that couldn't be further from the case. We see CAN more like this. By growing a network of churches who are building their own relationships with their MPs and having their own conversations about justice and peace, we're hoping to grow both your influence in public and political spaces, but also to grow your influence on us. We're helping the Baptist, URC, and Methodist churches work for justice and peace. And that means we need local churches to help us work for justice and peace. By listening to CAN churches, we'll be better able to understand your interests, what matters to you, and to ensure that we can support you to engage with public issues in ways that are relevant and useful to you. Yet another way of building relationships that can shape us and reshape us. When I think of CAN, I kind of think of that bit in Acts 2 that's sometimes referred to as the holy habits, where believers share everything in common, eating together, praying together, learning together, and meeting together in the temple courts. The temple courts were sort of the equivalent of the town square today. They were right at the center of things. It was a place to talk and pray, to meet powerful people and influence change. We are really, really good as churches at eating together, I think, learning together, I think, meeting together, worshiping together. But I believe it's really time to take that power that we already have into the courts, into the town square, into our MPs' offices, to have that same influence on public issues that inspired and mobilized Jesus's early disciples.